Hello everybody. In this video, we will discuss about the distributed database architecture. The distributed database system contains two main subsystems. One is the transaction manager and another one is the transaction coordinator. Each and every site in which the database is distributed have these two components that is called as transaction coordinator and transaction manager. The transaction coordinator and manager responsibilities are explained as follows. First, we'll know about what are the types of the transactions. There are two types of transactions. One is a local transaction and another one is a global transaction. A local transaction accesses the data in the site where the transaction is initiated. Where the transaction is executed in the same site itself, the data is available means then that transaction is called as local transaction. If a transaction is accessing the data from several different sites than the site from which it is initiated, that is called as global transaction. Now, the responsibilities of the transaction coordinator. So every site has a transaction manager component as well as a transaction coordinator component. The transaction coordinator subsystem of a site will become active when a transaction is initiated in that particular site. When a transaction is initiated in that particular site, the transaction coordinator subsystem is responsible to coordinate the execution of various sub-transactions that is initiated from that site. The responsibilities of the transaction coordinator are to start the execution of the transaction and to break the work that is done by the transaction into a number of sub transactions and distributing the sub transactions to the appropriate sites that contains the data. And the third responsibility is once the sub transactions are distributed, the it is again the responsibility of the transaction coordinator to coordinate the termination of the transaction. This may result, the termination of the transaction may result in either all the sites being committed or all the sites being aborted, depending on whether the sub transactions are completing successfully or not. The responsibilities of the transaction manager component are as follows. The transaction manager component is responsible for managing the execution of the transactions that is accessing the data in a site, in a particular site. Okay, so that is it provides all the that is resources for the sub transactions that is executing in that site. Each transaction that is executed may be either a local or a global transaction. And the responsibility of the transaction manager is to manage a log for the purposes of recovery and to choose an appropriate concurrency control scheme in order to coordinate with the concurrent execution of the transaction in a consistent manner. These are the important responsibilities of the transaction coordinator and the transaction manager subsystem. These two plays a very important role in the distributed system architecture. Thanks for watching.